A militant greeting to everyone, to all of the members of Anakbayan Canada. I am Jeann Miranda, the national spokesperson of Anakbayan, and I am extending my gratitude and my congratulations to your second National Congress, and for inviting me to speak about the situation here in the Philippines. To start, in the last year of Rodrigo Duterte in power, the Filipino people are being challenged to hold him and his cronies, his generals, his military accountable for their crimes against the Filipino people. The destruction that he has brought to us, to our lives, to our livelihoods, to our education is unparalleled. According to his needs, many people have been killed, under his drug war, under his whole of nation approach, under his fraud counter-insurgency programs. He used the COVID-19 pandemic to spread further his terror all over the country. And we see now that in his last year, he is clinging to every last bit of power that he can. He wants to run for vice president. He declared almost a week ago with Bongo as his tandem as his president, but also he withdrew his candidacy, and he is now running for senator. Just to protect himself from being indicted by the International Criminal Court against for his crimes against humanity. And we see that there is a rift between the ruling class. With his daughter running as the vice president of Bongbong Marcos, or Ferdinand Marcos' son, and Sara Duterte, his daughter, transferring to another party from to Lakas CMD with Arroyo and Marcos Jr. There are two reasons that Sara Duterte has done this, or that this is happening in the elections. First is that the ruling class has already run deep in their family. That there is no blood. That Sara Duterte wants the power only to herself. That is the characteristic of a ruling class, wanting the power only for themselves. That's why their allies or allyship is always, fleeting and only short term. But also, we see that maybe it's also part of Duterte's scheme to stay in power, to run away from his from being held accountable by the ICC and the Filipino people. We need to emphasize that Duterte should not have a graceful ending in the nearing 2022 elections. Our immediate political task of all the democratic forces in the Philippines is to hold him accountable, is to let him pay for his crimes against the Filipino masses, against the Filipino youth, against his exploitation and oppression. That's why we say that his first crime is his crimes against humanity, the thousands of killings in the Philippines. Statistics say that there are over 30,000 lives that he claimed in his war on drugs since July 1, 2016 until March 16, 2019. He directly told his policemen to kill everyone who is a suspect of selling drugs or using drugs. This anti-poor program of Duterte. He did not hold these policemen accountable of their crimes because he himself is a criminal. And it is the very basis of why the International Criminal Court has filed a case against Duterte because of his crimes against humanity. A third of the cases are because of the operation of the Philippine National Police, and some of these cases are because or done by the operations of his vigilant group, the Davao Death Squad, formerly known as the Duterte Death Squad or the DDS in Davao. And according to Human Rights Watch, um, these killings doubled in the time of the pandemic. It means that the war on drugs did not stop because of the pandemic. It only heightened, it intensified. They used the pandemic to kill more lives, to claim more lives. Um, the center of the Duterte administration is his war on drugs. This is why he won. Because the Filipino people wanted change. When they saw drug addicts as one of the reasons why the Philippines is not advancing. And Duterte gave them this change that they wanted to see. And this is what they call oplan tokhang, katok or knock, and then right there and then they shoot the suspected drug user or drug runner, you know. In one report from Reuters in 2017, they showed that the operation of the PNP, the drug operation of the PNP, they give 40,000 pesos to a person or to a group who has killed a target. 40,000 pesos in exchange for a life. And in an investigation of the Office of the Higher Commission for Human Rights in the same year, in 2017, they saw that there's only one serial number for the many guns that they see or that they use as evidence in scenes, in crime scenes, where they say that that person is nanlaban or fought, or that person fought, that's why they killed that person. It only means that the PNP or the operatives that killed that suspected drug user planted the guns, And the PNP now and Duterte is trying to run away from this crime. But the Filipino people is firm in holding them accountable for their crimes against humanity. His second crime is his crime in war crimes. In his guerra contra terrorismo, his counterinsurgency program, in his war against terrorism, Duterte told his military and police to kill activists, to kill consultants of the National Democratic Front of the Philippines, to kill civilians and everyone who is against his rule. They have what is called the AFP Development Support and Security Plan Kapayapaan or OPLAN Kapayapaan and the AFP-PNP Joint Campaign Plan Kapanatagan that targets everyone who is linked to the New People's Army. Everyone who they think is a rebel, everyone who they think is armed, and same with the war on drugs, they plant, what do you call this? They plant guns, explosives in houses, in headquarters, and offices of activists, and those who they think should be indicted of being a rebel. They put barangays, usually in countrysides, under hamleting or control of the military of the population. They limit of who goes inside and who goes outside the barangay to single out those who they think are NPA sympathizers. And in the last in a report by Karapatan, a human rights organization, we have now reached 1,018,508 individuals who are victims of Duterte's human rights violations from July 2016 to December 2020. 376 of these victims are extrajudicial killings. 488 are a victim of they just ran away, they got away in time. 18 got away from being imprisoned. 3,675 were arrested or detained. 3,349 were are fake surrenderies. You know, almost half of these victims are what we call bakwit, or those who evacuated from their lands because of heightened police or military operations, because of the psy-war or psychological warfare from the military. 372,629 are affected of bombings and canyons of the military, or strafing. Strafing? I'm sorry. Yeah. In the first half of 2021, 16,845 victims, or there were additional 16,845 victims of human rights violations. 16 were killed by Duterte's administration. 201 were arrested, and I personally know two of them. One was Joseph Canlas, a peasant organizer in Central Luzon. He was one of the first people I knew when I was a new activist in Central Luzon. It was very heartbreaking. He was illegally detained, and then he died of COVID in jail in May 2021. Under Duterte's rule, there were a series of killings. If you guys know Bloody Sunday in Southern Tagalog, March 7, 9 people were killed, and then many were detained. The Tumandok massacre in Capiz in December 2020. The different or individual killings in the Negros Island, where 14 civilians, 14 farmers were killed in March 2019. The Sagay 9 massacre in Negros Occidental in October 2018. These were only a few of what happened under Duterte's rule. In barangays occupied by the military, they impose de facto martial law. Even actually all over the Philippines, there's a de facto martial law, unannounced. We feel it, but it's unannounced. What do you call this? There is mandatory there is a mandatory, what do you call this? They go to houses and search houses, and the people can't do anything to stop them. There are forced surrenderies. They promise these surrenderies money or house or food but in reality they're not really NPA members. They're just farmers who needed food or money. And then they control the actions of the people. They control the lives and commerce of the residents of that barangay. There were 610 barangays in 321 municipalities in 65 provinces who were a victim of hamleting or control of the military. Many of these areas that are being attacked by the military of Duterte are in Bicol region, in the Negros Island, and Eastern Visayas, which are under the Proclamation or Memorandum Order 32, which Duterte gave out in 2018, if I remember it right, which intensified the attacks in Lumad communities in Mindanao, in Tumandok communities in Panay, and Dumagat communities in Southern Tagalog. Lumads, Tumandoks, and Dumagats are indigenous people in the Philippines. 176 Lumad schools were shut down by the military, by DepEd or Department of Education, in different provinces in Mindanao because of the heightened military occupation in Mindanao. They forced, as I said earlier, people were forced to surrender even though they were not members of the NPA. In 2020, they pushed people, 7,615 NPA members, or 7,615 civilians were tagged as NPA members, militia, and are members of underground organizations. But in reality, they're just farmers who needed money. And they said that they didn't want anymore to support the NPA, that they were, but in reality, these people are under the Enhanced Comprehensive Local Integration Program, or ECLIP, under the Barangay Development Program of the NTF-LCAC. You know, or sorry, they're different things. Other different things. The ECLIP is a program that they give people money to surrender, you know. But in reality, these people may not even be, you know, NPA surrenderies. And in the time of the pandemic, they give out financial aid to people under the NTF-LCAC's Barangay Development Program. Yeah. So that is Duterte's second crime against the Filipino people. Him being his war crimes. You know. The third is his criminal negligence and abuse of authority in the time of the pandemic. We all know this. He didn't close the borders. He didn't give out, or he didn't heed the calls of the Filipino people for free mass testing. The Philippines is the very last in lifting up the lockdown, I think. Yeah, or we have the longest lockdown in all of Asia. Also, you know, he didn't actively do things to give a solution to the pandemic. Instead, he used the pandemic to earn money. If all of you are updated with the news about Formally, where this new corporation owned millions in contracts in the Philippines. They sold the face shields, face masks, and other equipments used in the medical field in a higher price. For example, you can buy face shields for 15 pesos. But they sold face shields, or in their accounts, they sold face shields for 200 pesos, which is like 100% more than 100%, you know, expensive than what you can buy. So that's a corruption case, and actually, COA traced that there were different anomalies in the budgets in the time of the pandemic, especially the Department of Health. You know, for example, imagine you spent 1 million pesos for a Zoom meeting. That's very suspicious, right? So they used the pandemic to earn. That's why they imposed, or Duterte imposed the longest lockdown in Southeast Asia. And millions of Filipinos still don't have vaccines. Yeah, they used the pandemic not just to earn money, but also to kill the Filipino people. You know, yeah. The next is he sabotaged. His next crime against the Filipino people is that he sabotaged our economy. You know, he bankrupted our economy, and he dug his grave deeper because of his debts that the Filipino people will be paying in time. In 2020, the gross domestic product of the Philippines reached 9.6%, the worst since the 1940s, because of the intensified lockdown. In Ibon Foundation's statistics, 4 billion pesos per day is there is a loss in our economy of 4 billion pesos per day. Duterte massacred many jobs. Disemployment is widespread in our country. You know, even those who are professionals, who were not affected by previous economic recessions, are now being affected by Duterte's sabotage of the economy. You know, everyone, even doctors, lawyers, professionals, not just the working class, are experiencing poverty. What more do the working class are experiencing now? It means that they are experiencing even worse hunger and poverty. Duterte has many debts because of his build projects, his infrastructure projects. In 5 years, he doubled the debt from from 5.9 trillion pesos or 58,250 pesos per Filipino to 11.07 trillion pesos or 100,636 pesos per Filipino in June 2021. So I will be paying 100,636 pesos because of his debts. My young brother will be paying 100,636 pesos in debt even though he is not even experiencing this infrastructure projects or it is not for the development of the Philippines. 665.7 billion pesos of these debts are being put into vaccine, financial aid, and other services. So it means that only a small portion of these debt is given to the needs of the Filipino people under the pandemic. Because of Duterte's unending debt, everyone, is carrying a heavy burden. This year, the regime gave out 1.704 trillion pesos as a budget to pay for the debt of the government. You know, um, and in the start of the Duterte administration, Duterte put um, put another level in our taxes because of train law. And because of different additional laws, such as the CREATE law or the Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises, where big companies would not pay for taxes. So the taxes that these companies used to pay for are now being shouldered by the normal Filipino people, by the civilians. Um, Duterte is killing our local industry because of neoliberal policies such as the Rice Mobilization Act. And that's why, Duterte should be held accountable. That's another reason. The next reason is him being a traitor to the Filipino people. Everyone knows that he is a puppet of US and China, but we should always remember that Duterte is first and foremost a puppet of US before he is a puppet of China. We know all about the West Philippine Sea. Until now, the ships of the Chinese are in our seas, and Duterte is doing nothing to make them go away. He pretended to finish off the Visiting Forces Agreement or the VFA in the start of 2020, but he crumbled because the US gave him money and military equipments, and he didn't end the VFA. Duterte continued EDCA or Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement with the US, which gives the US the right to build facilities in our countries to be a camp for their militaries. That's why there are many militaries of the US here in our country. In his war against terrorism in Marawi in 2017, he gave way for Operation Pacific Eagle Philippines in the US to give permanent positions for special operatives in the US and the Philippines. He gave way to the plans of the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization's operation of the US State Department in June 2020 to conduct a 3-year anti-terrorism program. This program is this program uses the whole of nation approach, to end terrorism in the Philippines. He gave way for war exercises in Omplan. He gave way to war exercises in the Philippines. There are many camps of the AFPs which are also facilities of the US military, including Cesar Basa Air Base in Pampanga, Fort Magsaysay Military Reservation in Nueva Ecija, Lumbia Air Base in Cagayan de Oro, Antonio Bautista Air Base in Palawan, Mactan Benito Ebuen Air Base in Cebu. And because of these war exercises, because of these facilities, in 2020, we saw that Duterte gave pardon to Joseph Scott Pemberton even though he killed Jennifer Laude in 2014. he went back to the US without any accountability. The next is Duterte's smuggling and selling of illegal drugs in the Philippines. He's a drug king in our country. He used the PNP for his war against drugs to destroy the operations of his of syndicates in the Philippines, criminal syndicates in the Philippines, who are not under his reign, so that he could centralize the selling of illegal drugs in our country. Under Duterte, the operations of the international syndicates who sell illegal drugs in the Philippines was more widespread. Under the report of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, or UNODC in 2019, the volume that was confiscated by the PNP or by the government of drugs became more. 89 kilos per month in 2014 to 2015 became 143.95 kilos per month in 2016 to 2019. According to the 2021 US International Narcotics Strategy Report, a big part of the local consumed, I believe shabu is heroin in English, is being supplied by an international syndicate in China. Other than the illegal entrance of shabu in our country, in the Philippines, or the illegal selling of shabu in the Philippines, this syndicate in China uses the Philippines to give way to chemical and material, or the Philippines becomes a passageway to transport chemicals and materials in the making of heroin in Thailand and Myanmar. In 2018, more than 40 officials of the Philippine Drug Enforcement Agency, or PDEA, were evicted from office because but none of them were indicted. And a drug lord was freed, and more than 48 of drug lords were freed in the time of the pandemic because they wanted to give space to more people. So that's how worse the situation of drugs is in the Philippines at the time of Duterte. Next is that he used the DFP and PNP as his private army. Not to serve the people, but to serve his personal needs and interests. He put his generals in places of power in departments that they don't even know anything about. He uses a big chunk of our budget. So a big chunk of the budget of the Philippines goes to infrastructure, but a big chunk also goes to military equipments. He bought jet fighters. He bought guns. He bought warships. He bought a helicopter. Even in the time of the pandemic, just to satisfy his military and police. The next one is corruption and corruption in the Philippines. Recently there was news of different budget abnormalities given by the Commission on Audit. And also Duterte is not giving out his SALN, but his SALN, or his statement of assets, liabilities, and net worth. So there is widespread corruption in the Philippines, in the Philippine government. In the list of Transparency International, the Philippines is ranked as 14, in being non-transparent It means that because of Duterte wanting to protect his riches that he got from the Filipino people, he didn't give out his salin, and but right now he is being exposed by the COA, or Commission on Audit, because of the millions of abnormalities and different operations of different departments and cabinet members. Next is his junking of the peace talks, red tagging, and terrorist labeling. So, even I, as a victim of red tagging, as the spokesperson of Anakbayan's national office, under him, everyone is a terrorist. Everyone who is a critic of Duterte is a terrorist, or is an NPA member. Millions, or many members of many consultants of the NDFP, National Democratic Front of the Philippines, were killed in his reign. Eugenia Magpantay, Randy Echaniz, and others were killed in his reign. In 2018, Duterte, many political prisoners are, or there is a rising number of political prisoners. Anakbayan na Naga City's chairperson sa Santa Rosa was detained, and in May 2019, a year or a day after the Mayo 1 mobilization, because of illegal possession of firearms and explosives. She's now freed, but a member of Anakbayan was illegally detained, and a victim of Duterte's counterinsurgency programs. He built NTF-LCAC just to serve this purpose, to red tag civilians, to attack critics, to harm the Filipino people, and to discredit the struggle and the fight of the Filipino people. And the very last crime that he has on the Filipino people is the genocide against the Moro people. His bombing, his 5-month bombing of Marawi City from May 23 to October 23, 2017, in his war against terrorism, thousands of Moro residents in Mindanao were killed and were forced to evacuate their land. They were peacefully living in Mindanao. 210,000 residents were peacefully living in Maranao. In Mindanao, most of them Maranao, and an indigenous people, they're indigenous peoples in the Philippines. And because of Duterte's war against terrorism, they were a victim, or many were killed, and many were forced to evacuate their land. Many of them were imprisoned in what they call Ground Zero, where there were a series of jet fighters dropping bombs, canyons of mortar and howitzer were being dropped down, and there were people there. And the AFP knew that there were people there, but they pushed to do it knowingly. 4 years after the Marawi siege, there's still no justice for the Moro people. They still haven't went back to their 27,000 families. Still hasn't gone back to Marawi, and they're planning to make Marawi an economic zone, with the US, with the United States. Over 200 of 20,000 families went back to their barangays, but the majority still hasn't gone back. This June 10, someone from Ground Zero said that someone from the government the government is getting their lands. Because, as I said earlier, they wanted to do the project of beautifying the Islamic city of Marawi. In other news, the AFP and the US occupied a part of the city which the Moro are are referring to as blessed, you know. What do you call this? The AFP, the PNP, and Duterte are the worst, for killing thousands of lives of Filipino people for their personal interests. That's why there's a need to hold Duterte accountability, and the only way to do that is to oust him, is to not give him a graceful ending in the 2022 elections. We are ready to, or we should be ready to mobilize, to arouse, to organize, to mobilize the masses, to hold Duterte accountable. We know, the Filipino people know that Duterte has not done any good for them. It is only a matter of us organizing and mobilizing them to lead Duterte to his end. And of course, it does not stop there. When Duterte's reign ends, we want to push it further until the victory of the national democratic struggle. But that isn't easy. That takes time. That takes effort. That is why we need to intensify our organizing, our mobilizing in the country and out of the country. This is a very crucial time for us, for those who are in the national democratic struggle and for the Filipino people. It is a time that is very ripe to further the struggle. As Joma Season said, all the conditions are around us to wage a revolution. The only thing that we need to do is to organize, to educate the masses, to mobilize them, and to let them know that we will only be achieving a society free from exploitation and oppression through the national democratic struggle. That's why our role in society is very important. We are not saviors, of course. The masses are the Messiah. But organizers play a very important part in making the people realize that they are the Messiah, that they are the ones responsible and are capable of changing the society. Until we reach the victory of the national democratic struggle. That's why we need to keep fighting. That's why we need to keep organizing. That's why we need to keep mobilizing. As, what do you call this? For the Filipino youth. As Ka Ores said, in his, who are afraid, in his article, who is afraid of the Filipino youth. We, the Filipino youth, have no reason to be scared in taking part in the revolution, in following the steps of the revolution. It is the Duterte regime, it is the fascists, it is the tyrants, it is the dictators who are afraid of us. Because they once had this thought that they too, are bringers of change. And they know that if we link together, that if we link our intellect, our energy, all that we have with the basic masses, with the farmers, with the workers, we are unstoppable, and that we can take them down. That's why we, the Filipino youth, have nothing to be afraid of in taking part in the revolution. We should embody the revolutionary vigor of Bonifacio, of the Kabataang Makabayan. There is no stopping the revolution. That's why we, the Filipino youth, as the generation or as the people who will be, who are, what we call the tagapagmana of the world, we should fight. And we should not stop until we reach the victory of the national democratic struggle. That's why the Filipino youth here in the Philippines are inviting everyone to go here, to experience the life of the masses, to organize here in the Philippines, to really experience and show everyone that the victory of the national democratic struggle is inevitable. It is a matter of us, of the subjective forces, pushing to to quicken, the process. To finish it off, I just want to emphasize that the Filipino youth have nothing to be afraid of in taking part in the revolution. And the evidence to that is the thousands of those who fought and died for the struggle. Mabuhay lahat ng mga martir ng pambansa demokratikong pakikibaka. Mabuhay lahat ng kabataang Pilipino. Mabuhay ang kabataang makabayan. Mabuhay ang sambayanang lumalaban. Maraming salamat po. Thank you very much for inviting me.